Welcome, everybody, to Strife's Sanctum. This week, I'm going to go for a game that has a lot of mixed feelings for me. Normally, I like to go through things that I have nothing but positive things to say, and this is going to be one of those times where I'm not going to be angry about something, but I am going to try and justify why something doesn't work. Why I still think the game works as a whole, but has issues with it. And as you can see, today's game is Chrono Cross. And I find it even more interesting to talk about it knowing that next month, at time of recording, is going to be the re-release of Chrono Cross after 20 years away. And they're actually going to pile on Radical Dreamers. So I took some time to rewatch Radical Dreamers. And I've recently replayed Chrono Cross on my own to really try to understand what I did like and what I didn't like. And thinking back on it, all of the things that I did like about it still hold up. And a lot of the things that I don't like still don't hold up. And there's one specific thing that holds Chrono Cross up higher than any other game in existence, and I will gush over that when I get to it. That being said, you can't really talk about Chrono Cross before talking about Chrono Trigger. For me personally, I don't find Chrono Trigger as good a game as Final Fantasy VI or Lufia 2 Rise of the Sinistrals. Sinistrals. But it's personal preference. Because you have to remember at that time, Squaresoft was in one of those crazy, really good runs of things. Much like Atlas is now with the Persona franchise, or Dragon Quest always is, or Yakuza is now. Where it seems like nothing they do can go wrong. And when they released Chrono Trigger, they had Hironobu Sakaguchi, who was making Final Fantasy stuff at the time. This is a year after Final Fantasy IV, or Final Fantasy VI. So a few years after Final Fantasy IV, Final Fantasy V, Secret of Mana, Final Fantasy VI, and then this? You have Sakaguchi making this, you have Yasunori Mitsuda and Nobuo Uematsu making it. You have a very sleek, very stylish, very short game, like 15 to 20 hours, but packed to the brim with things. And it has withstood the test of time. And even though, like I said, it's not my favorite SNES game, it is widely regarded as the best or one of the best by nearly everybody. So Chrono Cross had a lot to live up to, and to an extent it does, but again, I think a lot of people have recognized that it's meant to be its own beast. Let me stop you right there and say it is not a sequel. It is a companion piece, but it's not really a sequel. Having read up on it some more and having understood what the creator was going for, it is its own thing, and it's meant to be its own thing. It's not meant to be Chrono Trigger 2, for better or for worse. And at the time, was trying some things that honestly didn't hold up very well. And I think in reflection, he understood that, but at the same time, there's nothing saying you can't at least respect the effort that was put in, because a lot of effort was put into this game. It's still really good. And Radical Dreamers does, at least, because this was released on a companion, like a not quite Super Famicom, not quite Super Nintendo. It's kind of like one of those DLC kind of like extra peripheral things called the Satellaview. We didn't really have access to it. But looking back on it, and if you haven't seen it, this will be a spoiler review, just because there's no way I can't really talk about the story without spoiling it, because, my God, there's a lot to go into. Radical Dreamers informs what the Chrono Cross world was going to be, to a certain extent. What I find Radical Dreamers ends up being is a very crucial plot point in Chrono Cross, focused on as if it was a D&D campaign. You take yourself into the Viper Manor segment, and you solely focus on the Viper Manor segment. It's a very dark visual novel, literally and figuratively, with a lot of more focus on Kid than even Chrono Cross does. Surge plays kind of a not quite the silent protagonist dork face, So we'll get that out of the way. He's a silent protagonist in Chrono Cross. You know how I feel already. But he has his own character, and Kid has his own character, and they're also with who ends up being Magus in Radical Dreamers. So you already kind of see those little tie-ins from what Chrono Cross ends up being and how it ties into Chrono Trigger as its own different thing. A lot of the songs from Radical Dreamers that are in the plot, as backdrop music, end up in Chrono Cross itself, specifically Viper Manor and Radical Dreamers. So, there are effects on Chrono Cross itself that Radical Dreamers does, and it's nice to see what a few years of extra development ends up doing for an actual full-on release, and what the tone of Radical Dreamers is, because the tone of Chrono Cross isn't as dark as you'd think it would be, and Radical Dreamers really hits home. It's kind of like Chrono Trigger, where there are moments of real brilliance for a grown-up, because the older I get, the more I respond to the darker, more edgier kind of things without the whole fan service concept. I'm talking mature themes, as in this is pretty dark and pretty depressing, or this is very serious stakes that are going on. And Radical Dreamers has a bunch of that, specifically the Riddell and the Dragoons and Lynx kind of thing, because they actually focus it on as an abduction storyline rather than just a sort of takeover, not quite takeover kind of thing, which in the actual release happens. So remember, Radical Dreamers has nothing to do with Chrono Cross, but it also informs you of the world that they inhabit to an extent and what they were going to do with it, because it was made by the same writer. So let that be what it is. Masato Kato was the one who wrote all three. So he was the one who decided not to make a Chrono Trigger 2, and I do respect that to an extent. What I do want to do first is actually get into the main characters, because I want to introduce the characters first before trying to really dive into the story, because God help me, I have no clue what the story is. Even after reading up on it, because it's one thing to play the game and trying to understand it, is another to read a Wikipedia article, which, to be fair, tries its best. And even then, your grasp on the situation does kind of start slipping. But bear in mind, I will do my best. And I will also do my best not to talk about every single character that Chrono Cross involves. I will do my best to do at most 5 to 10. Because really, only 5 to 10 characters, and admittedly 4, really matter plot-wise. So our first character is Surge, henceforth known as Dorkface, because that's what I always do with silent protagonists. So Dorkface is part of a village known as Arnie. He wanders onto a beat because his childhood friend, not girlfriend, but she wants it to be, Lena, decides, hey, go get me a necklace or something, in a kind of a snooty way, but also that nice snooty kind of way, like she likes him, but whatever. He wakes up in a different beach, I guess, because dimensional travel, I don't understand. He ends up showing up, but while he does the first mission, he shows up in a different alternate reality, because apparently it was split into 2. Because reasons. But that means the main story arc and the idea is it's dimension hopping. So I will try to go back and forth in the story as best I can, but first, suffice it to say, it's dimension hopping. It's the same world, but different effects and different people. The world was split into two. It takes a while for the game to really understand why it happens, but go with it. Dorkface is caught in another world, and it's a little bit darker, but not really. Just the music is slightly different, which is cool, but also not really. Lena doesn't know who he is because she doesn't really know. She thinks he's faking because he's a dead guy in this world, and he tries to figure out what the fuck's going on. So he goes to a place, finds out he is legitimately dead in this world. So Kid shows up. And Kid is an interesting thief. Think Zidane if he was a girl. Zidane from Final Fantasy IX if he was a girl, pretty much. Almost like an Australian Zidane. That's the best way I would describe it. She's a thief. She's a bit of a hothead. She's got a temper. But she's nice. And she's just this really diminutive, like, thief girl lady. It's kind of crazy. If you're wondering, like, the weights and the heights are listed in game, and like Surge is supposed to be like 135 pounds and Kid is like 95, so it's really awkward. It's like wrestling weights are higher than they appear. In this game, weights are lower than they appear, because Surge doesn't look anything under 160. But anyway, that's just a quibble. So Kid offers to help him because she knows she wants to go to some place and steal some stuff, and she has personal and professional reasons to do so. So they go to infiltrate Viper Manor, and this is reminiscent of the Radical Dreamer storyline. This is exactly what happens, but it's a slightly different situation. So Dorkface and Kid. The cool thing is you can find several different ways of doing it. You can go through a forest, you can go via a back door on a boat, or you can find a way via this person known as Guile, who is not Megas, by the way. It was confirmed by Masato Kato that Megas was supposed to be in, and there's a reference to him, but he's not in there. So he was meant to be in, but not really. So let that rumor go to bed, I suppose. So they infiltrate Viper Manor and they wander around, and they're also being chased by the Acacia Dragoons, who were, part of Viper Manor, kind of like security staff and stuff like that. Radius was a former member, and he's helped train Surge in the other world, so that's how Surge knows how to fight. So at least they explain why Dorkface knows how to fight as great as everybody does, outside of plot armor. So they keep going and infiltrating. It's a nice, crazy, subdued intensity while you're going through Viper Manor with some awesome music. And they happen upon Lynx and Harley and General Viper. So Lynx is the main antagonist of the game, and he has his reasons for wanting Surge, but he's also dealing with Kid because he has she has a personal vendetta against him, which we'll talk about in a minute. Harley has her own kind of vibe going on, and she sees Surge as somebody very important, but she also knows that Lynx is important, so she's kind of caught in both. And Harlequin is what you'd think she would be. She's Harley Quinn from Batman, if French, I guess. And she's played really weird. And I like her, and she's great. Lynx is very imposing, very tall, panther-looking dude. He's got a similar weapon to Surge, but he's got like control of darkness versus light, which is a neat touch. And they try to like run away. Lady Riddell, who is one of my early crushes as far as video game characters go, because her design is amazing. Like really dark purple hair, a crazy like green dress. In Radical Dreamer, she's a captive, and General Viper is dead. In this, General Viper is alive, but they're sort of aligned, but not really. And Riddell is just caught in the middle of it. Not like a snooty princess, but she's got her own little subplot storyline, which I like later. That gets focused on, but let's face it, goes into the hardest fight in the whole fucking game. So if you do want to go into that storyline, you have its own thing. but you do get the best weapon out of it. So Riddell is somebody you want to keep an eye on, and I like her a lot. But anyway, she's also the best healer, so shut up. But she doesn't get a lot of screen time, which is unfortunate, and that's one of the drawbacks. Is you're focusing on Dorkface, Kid, Lynx, and Harley. Everybody else, Viper, Riddell, and the Dragoons, they're important, but not really. So you're really just following the main four, and to be honest, the main three, because Dorkface is Dorkface, and silent protagonists don't have characters. They have characters foisted upon them. But anyway, so Kid tries to escape. Lynx puts her in a sort of coma because of a poison. So Surge has to decide, does he leave her to die or does he search for a cure? If you search for a cure, you can go back to the home world via an amulet that she carries. If you just leave her to die, then you go about your own merry way. And I do like that you can do different things and try different things. So Lynx is actively searching for something known as the Frozen Flame and the Chrono Trigger. He knows where to find them. We personally don't, but Lynx is working with the Acacia Dragoons and General Viper to find it. He's also looking for something known as the Dragon's Tear. And they keep going, and they keep going, and they keep going to a big fucking dungeon about, 30% of the way through the game, known as Fort Dragonia. Lynx ends up betraying General Viper, and then they switch bodies, like you do. So Lynx gets defeated, but he switches bodies with Surge, and then he stabs Kid for some reason, and then stabs Viper. I can understand stabbing Viper. I guess Kid was just a 2-for-1 deal. Let it be said, Kid has more of an antagonistic version of the story than Lynx does to her. But Kid was apparently in an orphanage run by Luca from Chrono Trigger. Lynx and Harley burned it to the ground, so reasons. But again, that's where the story gets weird. If it wasn't weird enough that Lynx and Surge switch bodies so that for half or a second third of the game, you're in control of Lynx's body and everybody thinks you're Lynx and wants to kill you. So Surge is now Lynx and can speak because he's Lynx, and he takes control of Kid because she thinks Lynx is in one body, but he wants her to kill Dorkface because Harley decides to work with Surge, who's now in Lynx's my brain, and it's not even started yet. So you go to these dragons. So bear with it. I'm getting there. This is starting to remind me of Final Fantasy VIII, and it's hurting my brain. Anyway, dragons are real, like you do, and they say we can take you to someplace known as the Dead Sea, but you gotta fight us first, and then you gotta deal with all these other little things. There's some side things you can do here and there, but you go to the Dead Sea, and you realize that Surge himself was like poisoned as a kid or at death's door. And his father, Wazuki, and Miguel were there in the Dead Sea, this place known as Chronopolis, I believe. And they asked that this thing gets taken care of and save his kid. And in the way they end up doing that is Wazuki turns into Lynx somehow, and Surge survives somehow, and the world diverges into two somehow. Miguel is stuck there. And the hardest boss fight of the game, other than the secret boss fight with Riddell and Dario, is Miguel himself working for someone known as Fate. And Fate is on one side, and Harley apparently on the other side with the dragons. And again, this is explained in-game, but one of those like late entry things that tries to make sense, but really doesn't. But bear with it. I'm getting there. It's going to make sense. Miguel is trying to tell you that the events of Chrono Trigger fucked up the world to the point where about 10 or 15 years later, Lavos doesn't exist, but something else is trying to revive itself from Lavos' ashes, known as the Time Devourer, and whatever was ruling Chronopolis in the future decided, hey, we don't want this future, so we'll turn this dork-face kid into this key that's going to save our world or stop it, and we're going to like condense the entire world into this like archipelago that is the main world, these series of islands. The dragons don't like that. They don't like fate and all that stuff. Fate being a giant machine lady, I guess. Oh yeah, and Lynx is apparently just fate. So this whole buildup of this whole main character, main villain, is just a side project of fate. So you can already see where I'm starting to fall flat. And Lynx is going there, and Lynx dies, and you fight Fate, and then you learn that Miguel is there, and, you know, he was already defeated, so Fate is like, you shouldn't stop me, I'm trying to save this world from the dragons. I'm like, what do the dragons have to do with anything? What does the Masamune being destroyed and turned into shit, being dark, have anything to do? I don't know. But then we find out that the dragons planned it. They planned it all. They planned for Fate to lose to Surge because Dorkface apparently has the power to open and unlock things. So Kid, who's apparently super fucking important because both Dorkface and Kid are important, find themselves in Fate's door, beat the shit out of Fate and destroy the machine that Fate was running. And then the dragons, partly via Harley, decide, hey, we're going to revive ourselves and revive this crazy on tower known as Terra Tower and rule the world, I guess, because there's a second major city. So you have a Chronopolis city, which you go into. Then you have Dinopolis, which is a tower, and my brain still hurts. And then you find out that a character from Chrono Trigger planned it all. So the character planned it all. One of the main characters from the Zeal Palace, one of the three wise men, Balthazar, who apparently is or isn't the same one from Chrono Trigger's events, knew it all and planned it all and decided through all this stuff. He saw that all this machinations with Fate and all these machinations with Dinopolis and these dragons and Harley, the entire thing was a setup. Apparently, he set it up so that Surge would gain power, and that Kid was apparently Shala Zeal this whole time. So Shala was reborn from events that happened in Chrono Trigger. She was swallowed up by Lavos, tried to basically be merged, I suppose, into what is known as the Time Devourer, and the entire thing. This entire gigantic mess of a story with dimension hopping and dork faces and dragoons and panther people and clowns and 40 other characters that don't mean anything was all about Shala this entire time. Which I do admit is an interesting concept because Shala was a character that I really liked in Chrono Trigger. But you can see where at the same time it really devolves the importance of Dorkface, because why would Shala give a shit about a guy known as Surge in the future? I don't know. Where's Magus in this whole thing? Once again, we don't know, because he was not part of the story. He was meant to be, but wasn't. So how did Shala even get into the Time Devourer thing? We saved Lavos, but it does make sense, and it doesn't make sense. And why is Balthazar turning everything into this fatalistic thing? So it's a machination. It's one of these stories that you're trying to justify as this big overarching, like, it's a narrative that they're trying to say, this happened because this happened, because this happened, and this happened, and we have no agency in it. We are fulfilling a role. We did not know that at the time. And you basically get dumped all of the Chronopolis and Surge and Kid and Shala and Lynx and Harley stuff within the last hour to 5 hours of the game. Like within the last final 2 dungeons. And it hurts. It hurts because, again, they had an idea, and I respect them for trying to do something very different, but as much as I like Shala, turning her into Kid but only making it sort of a plan to get her back was kind of weird. Like, if you'd have introduced Shala as a character in the game before then, as somebody who existed, you would have tied it back into Chrono Trigger, and it would have made more sense. But it doesn't, and it hurts my brain, and it's like, why? So instead of worrying about the plot and it not making any goddamn sense, let's talk about something else that doesn't make any sense. The battle system. My brain. Anyway, so Chrono Trigger was interesting because it had a free-flowing battle system with lots of techniques and double techs and triple techs, and everybody had different skills. And you still have techs to an extent, but everybody has their own. They have like 3 different techniques, and they do have triple techs and stuff. I think Glenn and Surge can do like the X strike thing, but I don't really see a lot of melding of skills. Maybe the Dragoons, if you use them, have their own, but the free-flowing double tech thing that was such a prevalent feature in Chrono Trigger is not a thing anymore. In its place is what's known as the element grid. And to do normal attacks, you have to do something known as percentage-based attacks. A lot of people just like to spam the heavy attack, but it has a high chance of missing. The main goal is to use the smaller attacks with accuracy and then build up to the big ones, or use an element, and you have like a stamina bar to, like, if you wanted to use an element, you have to expend a lot of the stamina. So there you got 7 points, and then you got another character with 7 points, and you got another character with 7 points, and you got your villains on the other side, your monsters, and they also have 7 points each round. And the elements are interesting, 6 elements, and it's a cool idea, but like curing spells to a majority of the extent are gone. I think Riddell and maybe some others have some buffs and debuffs and other skills, and you can heal yourself that way, but you're healing yourself via capsules and nostrums and these little things that you buy. You have to use cure spells themselves as elements. So you buy cure spells, but you can only use one in a certain slot. So you got like, I don't know, 30 some slot or 20 some slots or whatever at varying levels. It's a lot like the Final Fantasy 1 and Dungeons and Dragons like spell slot idea, but everybody has a specific amount of level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, on up. And at level 7, you only have, level 7, level 8, you only have like 2 or 3. So you don't have an unlimited supply. So you have to make sure that you use the right elements in the right way. But you also have to use elements that are opposing certain enemies. In certain battles, they'll use it against you. And if you have the wrong element against the wrong enemy, and they have some super strong attacks, if they turn the field to their color, they will wreck your shit. Miguel specifically, Dario specifically, the super boss, will fucking wreck your face if they have the element to their advantage. So you try to turn it against them as best you can. So it's a nice little strategy. Again, I don't know if it completely works to my satisfaction, though. It's a cool idea. I just don't know if I like you expend it and you have to use another one, but you also have to use your attacks to build up to it. I think if you had full access to the elements, it doesn't have the junction problem. Like, you're not junctioning elements to your stats or something like Final Fantasy VIII, so you don't have that problem. You have to use your elements. So in that sense, it still works, but I mean, they don't really have an impact, and outside of magic stats, nobody really has an improvement. Like, unless you use Harley or Riddell, your elemental magic power is not going to be all that stronger than somebody who's, say, Lena, who might have a high skill too. So this crazy babysitter girl with a spoon has the same amount of magic power as this dimension hopping dragon clown lady from another dimension, and it's like, it doesn't make sense sometimes. And it's that realm situation from Final Fantasy VI is like, why does this girl who's 10 years old have the same magical prowess as a half magic human and a Magitech soldier in their 20s who has experience with the shit. I don't get it. But that's another quibble. But elements are fun, and you get a little bit of versatility here and there, and everybody has their own elemental affinity. You know, Dorkface is white, Kid is red, Riddell is white, Harley's black, Viper is, I think Viper is, if I remember right, he's earth-based, so he's yellow. And everybody has their own. So you got your physical attackers, you got your debuffers, you got a character who can be a doppelganger. Apparently, she can be really goddamn powerful in the right circumstances with the right doppelganger skill. She can tear shit up. So you have that versatility. And again, while I like the fact that you have 45 different characters of different skills and different setups, when you realize that only 4 of them matter plot-wise, it really kind of wrecks the reason to use them in battle, because you have no emotional investment. Like, why would you not use Surge, Kid, and Harley? Well, I don't know if you can use Kid or Harley in the same party, but same idea. You can't use Lynx and Harley in the same thing because it's technically Dorkface and Harley. You can't use, Kid and Glenn because it's part of a story thing that you can't. So certain things only make sense. You should only be using. They let you do the Suikoden thing of have all these characters, but their motivations don't make sense. You have this kid who's a painter who just runs off to be a painter. You've got this lady who's scientifically whatever, she's experimenting on the scientific experiment, and the experiment asks you to get rid of it, and then it joins your party, and then the scientist joins your party later anyway. It's just like, why? And then the dragoons from a different world join your party because they weren't part of the party in the other world, and the other guy who trained you did, but then he whatever, and Harley joins you, but then she doesn't, and then she does again, and then Kid does the same. It's weird machinations that don't add up. You have this battle system where you don't even grind, which to an extent I'm okay with, but it also leads you to an example where if you get stuck from a boss, you build your stat bases to whatever you can and get stuck. Then you have to get better equipment. Then you have to get a better strategy. So it's a lot more strategy based than just plowing through an enemy. While I respect that, and some people would appreciate that, I find the finagling of things a bit annoying because you're so used to certain Final Fantasy games where you can just, like, if something doesn't work, you just plow through it. You level up and you plow through it. Like, you don't need as much strategy the more you level up. Persona, to an extent, is the same way. This game forces you to think strategically about who your party is and who you want to kill a certain boss, because you only level up after boss fights. So, it's fine. So then, with all that said, with all of that, the plot makes no goddamn sense. There are way too many characters for the plot to make sense. You have a battle system that sort of makes sense but doesn't. Where's the good stuff? Why do I still like this game if I hate all the other stuff that's going on? The music. The music in this game is fantastic. I would put this higher than any Final Fantasy soundtrack, higher than any Persona soundtrack, higher than any Zelda, Mario, whatever. Chrono Cross is my favorite soundtrack of all time. I do not take that lightly. I do not take those words lightly. And I'm not saying best. I'm saying favorite. There's a difference. It's a subtle difference of subjectivity. But Yasunori Mitsuda already had his opus with Chrono Trigger. He's done stuff like Xenoblade 2 and Xenoblade. He did Xenosaga 1, but he mostly did the cutscenes. He didn't really do a lot of the in-game stuff because there wasn't a lot to do. And in Xenosaga 2 and 3, there was Yuki Kajiura who did the soundtrack anyway. So he's focused on Xeno and Chrono Trigger and some other games, and he's going to be doing something known as the Sea of Stars this month or next month, I believe. So he is a very, very prolific composer. He is on par with Uematsu and some others, Shoji Meguro. I do not take that lightly, but even still, as much as I love Uematsu's stuff, Mitsuda somehow transcended that with a score that nearly every instance has this music that just transforms this game from a mess to something you want to experience. For all of its faults in the plots and the battles and the things, the music is what carries this game more than anything else, because you just want to be in that. The battle theme, some people hate it really badly. And I the battle theme aside, the main boss theme is actually pretty good too. But it's everything else. When you open up the game, you get this amazing cutscene with this flute and violin, and it's these acoustic guitars. These instrumentations that are in these themes, there's a lot of keyboards, there's a lot of flutes, there's a lot of violins, there's just a lot of folksy sounding themes, but they all sound like Chrono Trigger, and some of them are even remixes of Chrono Trigger themes. But for all the good that Chrono Trigger did from a music perspective, this exceeded it. It took the advancements in the Sony PlayStation hardware in the CD version, because this was out in 2000, so this is by the time they had orchestral themes, and you could do more than just have midis, right? So you have that opening theme, The Scars Left by Time. You have alternate themes for certain cities, whether you're in another world or not. So the other world has its theme, the home world has its theme, very reminiscent of the day-night cycle in Xenoblade 2. Fort Dragonia is one I really like. The big tower, third of the way through the game. It's just really like dark but driving theme that doesn't do a lot except has this main riff to it, and then it gets into these bells and organs and all these crazy instruments that really drive you forward because you're at this ultimate point of the early part of the game. Radical Dreamers, kids theme. Whether you do the vocal version at the end of the game that plays at the end of the game, or you have the one that plays when she's just talking. She's got several different themes because she's a main character. Radical Dreamers is a great callback. You got the Viper Manor theme, which is this really meet the persona infiltrating the palace kind of thing, but even slower. It builds you in this suspense. It's almost like every corner is going to be a trap. Everything's going to hurt you. Everything's going to stop you. These soft bells and bass lines really fuck with your head because you think, oh, I'm going to get into a fight, or oh god, I'm going to get into a trap or something. Viper Manor's really good, but everything leads up to what is honestly just a part of a game. You're trying to get the dragons, and you're trying to get the dragon's favor to open up the Dead Sea. So you go into this place known as Marbule. And one of the characters in the game is a musician, and another character is a dancer of his. And they put on what is known as a concert. And if you know me and you know Final Fantasy VI, you know the opera scene is amazing. So this is like a spiritual successor in a way. It's like Mitsuda's own version of that. So this guy plays this guitar to open up Marbule while the other guys are fighting. So he's got this song that turns these ghost things into ephemeral beings into real life. So they are able to be killed, and then you fight the dragon. But while you're doing that, you're given this crazy, it's not even a hard rock theme, it's just a guitar riff. But it's a high-end guitar riff that's a version of the Marbule theme that you play. And the riff that they do with this, I learned playing guitar with a lot of video game themes and stuff. Marbule was one of the ones that I loved the most. I love Scars Left by Time, and I love the battle themes. I love Fort Dragonia, but Marbule, that concert, if you've never heard it or never played it, I would definitely look it up. I believe the song is known as Magical Dreamers as opposed to Radical Dreamers, but my God, it brought me back to the opera scene all over again in its own way, using an electric guitar with some nice folkish instruments as a backdrop. Mitsuda helped take this game from a really weird mess of a game into this just awe-inspiring experience that, even with its faults, the Marble concert is really good. All of the places I go to, I sit there and I go, oh my God, I want to play this just to listen to the theme over and over and over and not get bored, you know? And again, this game has issues. You know, it's way too many playable characters, and of them, there's lacks of text and there's bad element systems. The plot is fucking bonkers. And what I wonder is it a good thing to have a game that is so convoluted that leaves you wanting more, but is also exhausting, filled to the brim with things, or is it better to have something that doesn't have enough? It felt to me like Radical Dreamers, the visual novel, had not enough meat on the bones, but Chrono Cross tried way too hard to force feed you everything, and also to try and make everything make sense, and also tried to make Chrono Trigger make sense. The main issue I find with Chrono Cross is, for all of its faults, there's still a good game trying to hide out in there. It's like Final Fantasy VIII to a lesser extent. There's a good game in there somewhere, but it's bogged down by either weird story or weird mechanics. In Final Fantasy VIII's case, the battle system works against itself, and in way too many ways. I think in Chrono Cross, the plot works against itself, and the fact that you have too many characters. So it's like thinking of Final Fantasy VIII. It's still a good game, but there's so much wrong with it. You're stuck in a limbo. Like, you don't want to hate it, but you don't want to like it completely either. Chrono Cross is the same way. The reason that I like it is that I'm carried through the game by a soundtrack that eclipses all of the other soundtracks I've ever heard. And I'm wheeled on by this sense of exploration and discovery. If nothing else, this game is about discovery. The things you end up discovering make no goddamn sense, but at least they try. But it's one of those stories where you're trying to add so goddamn many plot threads and have it make so many contrivances to bend over itself to make sense that it ends up becoming this weird amalgamation. It's not a story for the easy to understand. It's not a story that's easy to digest, and when you're done with it, you don't even remember that you've played it. It took me a couple of times to remember what the story was, but it's still an enjoyable experience. It's still something that I'm glad that they're revisiting in a remaster setting, but be forewarned that it doesn't make any goddamn sense. You could also say that Chrono Trigger, to an extent, doesn't make a lot of sense, but you have that. Chrono Trigger was very lean and mean. Chrono Cross is trying to be a 30 to 45 hour game as opposed to 20, and it shows. They tried to throw so much stuff at the wall, and while some of it sticks, there's a lot that doesn't. So you have to bear that in mind when you play it. Is it still something I want to play? Absolutely. Is it my favorite game on the PlayStation? No. Is it as good as Final Fantasy VII? No. Is it as good as Final Fantasy IX? No. It's in that Final Fantasy VIII vibe. It's probably like what Final Fantasy VIII could have been if it was more stupid but had more enjoyable aspects to it. It's that sort of thing. Like, you want to enjoy it, but you know that you're in for a weird fucking ride along the way. But you can still find some merit in it existing. So I'm grateful I played it. But that'll do it for me. And the next couple of weeks, we're going to have some interesting things we're going to be doing. I believe, off the top of my head, my schedule is going to be Ergo Proxy. Speaking of stuff that makes absolutely no goddamn sense, That'll be our next anime that we go through. Persona 5. Oh my god! If you thought I had a lot to talk about with Chrono Cross, you've seen nothing yet. That'll probably take me hours to get through. But I will do my best. I just completed the final Persona 5 playthrough, and I'm on to Legend of Mana now, and no better time than right after I've done 200 episodes to talk about a very, very interesting game. And then after that, Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. I've decided to kind of slowly, very slowly work my way through Ghost in the Shell and probably do bit by bit here and there. Thankfully, all of the stuff is on Amazon Prime, including the Scarlett Johansson movie, so I'm not gonna like bog down and like, here's Ghost in the Shell all the way through until I'm finished. No, I'm probably gonna do standalone complex. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do both seasons in one episode, but I'll try. If I find I can only do one, then I'll just save that for later. But I'm definitely going to do standalone complex. That is a show that I always come back to and enjoy. So we're going to talk about season 1 at the very least in a couple of weeks. So we've got a lot lined up, and I really do enjoy all these podcasts and stuff. But hopefully this one was another positive one. I know the at time of recording, I'm through the Miku one I uploaded, and I was pleasantly surprised at the turnout and the praise that was heaped for the Miku one, because that one is a near and dear to my heart, and it's probably going to end up being my favorite to do. But again, everyone's going to perform differently, and some episodes are just going to be better than theirs. That's just how it's going to be. So hopefully this one was a fun one. Hopefully, as convoluted as Chrono Cross is, and as convoluted as my explanation probably was, hopefully you found some enjoyment. Hopefully you guys have played it or are spurred on to try it for yourself. I know it was a spoiler review. Let that be what it was. But hopefully you guys enjoyed it. But that'll do it for me. Citizen Strife, signing off.